All right, this new chapter is titled From a Cell to an Organism. So, chapter 2 was all about the cell and the organelles that are found inside the cell. And then we went into like the cell theory, and we also covered how cells move molecules in and out of it, and then finished with photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So, this chapter is about how does a cell become an organism? So the objectives for section 3.1 is what are the phases of the cell cycle and why is the result of the cell cycle important? So quick review, what are you and every other living thing made of? I hope you're thinking cells. Where do cells come from? From other cells. And that's from the cell theory statement. How does a cell know how to function and reproduce? That has a lot to do with the genetic material that is found inside that cell. If it's a eukaryotic organism, then we're talking about the nucleus. So I decided, I missed a question here. What is a cycle? So a cycle is something that tends to like repeat itself. It kind of goes around and does the same thing depending on whatever it is. So you guys do, a cycle when you come to school. You go to first hour, second hour, third hour lunch, fourth hour, fifth hour, sixth hour, seventh hour, and then if you have sports, you go to sports afterwards, or maybe you go home. We see cycles in outside, with the seasons. We see cycles in our household, like the washing machine. It goes through a cycle. It does a wash and a rinse and a spin, and so on and so forth. So I decided to think about my day and how I spend my day, because it's basically the same if it's a school day. I spend a good portion of my day at school, and then I have sports practice afterwards. Then I'll go home and make dinner and get the kids, to eat and take a bath and get ready for bed, and then I'll do dishes, and there might be a small sliver of time for myself afterwards. Maybe I want to read a book, and then sleep. And I was being very generous with my sleep, and then preparing for the day, because getting two little kids ready for the day is quite time consuming. So you guys have typical days as well. Okay. So 3.1 active notes, the cell cycle. 3 big things happen. It's a cycle of growth, development, and then finally division. And so what I mean by growth is that the organism is going to grow in size, and that larger organisms have more cells. If I were to bring a blue whale into my classroom and ask you the question, hey, look at the cells of a blue whale, compare them to me. Are my cells smaller or bigger or the same? And you should say, they're the same. They're the same size, okay? But the blue whale has more cells than me. Okay, so, yeah. Development. Okay, so the second thing in the cells that the cell will develop and might become specialized. So what I mean by specialized is that it carries out a specific job. It's got a job. It's different from a different type of cell. So nerve cells are different from muscle cells. Nerve cells, they play a giant game of telephone throughout your body all day. Where muscle cells, they take those messages from the nerve cells and contract and help you move and pump blood throughout your body. But when we take a look at the structure of it, they're completely different. Neuron cells, they have these long tails called axons, and these arms, I don't want to say they're arms, but they're dendrites sticking out points, so they can communicate with as many neurons as possible. And here we have cardiac muscle here, but they're fibers, and they contract and they relax, and that's what causes you to move. And then finally, division. So a cell, it's growing, it's carrying out its job, and then if it gets too big, well, that's no good, because then it can't move things efficiently. So it's got to divide. And so this is a very complex multi-step process, and where a single cell, you can see here, will split into 2. And we are going to focus in on that in a couple of lectures here. So this is a electron microscope picture. It's been dyed, showing you that it's just about ready to split into 2. Okay, moving on. So the cell cycle has phases, and we're going to divide those phases into 2 big ones, interphase and then the mitotic phase. So interphase is where we get growth and development, and then that division part occurs in the mitotic phase. So interphase, three big things happen. We get rapid growth, organelles start to replicate, then we have our copying of the genetic material, and then finally some final preparations of cell division. Am I big enough? Do I have enough energy to do this process? And then it's going to go into this division part called the mitotic phase, where the cell reproduces, splits into two. And that can be broken down into a couple of stages. The first stage is where the nucleus divides. It's called mitosis. We'll dive into the phases of that. And then finally, the second stage is the cytoplasm divides. And then you end up with a cell that has reproduced and split into two. So this is I'm sorry for my coloring of this diagram, but I created this pie chart so you can see that a cell spends a big part of its time in interphase. And so I'm going to talk about these three stages of interphase in detail in this lecture, and then talk about cell division in depth in a different lecture. But I'm going to talk about how the cell grows and organelles duplicate, and then our DNA also duplicates or replicates, and then final preparations. But that's interphase right there, first main part of the cell cycle. And the second main part is cell division, or the mitotic phase. So interphase, we're going to just focus in on this nucleus. So remember, the nucleus kind of controls the activities of the cell. And when you take a look at the nucleus, the DNA inside tends to look spaghetti-like, okay? And you'll see some diagrams in your book. I guess I should put a picture of that on here. So the first stage is called the G1 stage, okay? So this is the G1. Cell grows and carries out functions, organelles, duplicates. So it's a period of rapid growth with some organelle replication. This is the longest stage of interphase, aka homework question right there. So the cell grows and it carries out its normal cell function. After G1, it's going to enter the S stage, where the chromosome, or the DNA, genetic material, whatever you want to call it, replicates or duplicates. So the cell continues to grow, but its DNA, okay, that's nucleic acids, are copied. Now the DNA at this stage is no longer like DNA. We tend to call it like chromatin, and it's just wrapped around a bunch of proteins. But it coils up and it forms these chromosomes. So the DNA that was spaghetti at the beginning of interphase now forms a structure called a chromosome. And this is what a chromosome looks like. So it's got these two arms, and they're held together by a structure called the centromere. You can see it's labeled there. And when it goes through duplication, so it's going to copy itself, you can see that they colored one, the same, and the other one a lighter color to show you that's the copy. These two arms of the chromosome are the same. They're held together by centromeres. One side is called a sister chromatid, the other side is called a sister chromatid, but together they make up still a chromosome. And then it will go through mitosis, that mitotic phase where it will divide and split, and we end up with copies of DNA. So sister chromatids are two identical chromosomes that make up a duplicated chromosome, and they are held together by that centromere. The final stage of interphase is the G2 stage. So we still get some growth, we still have cellular functions, it's still carrying out its jobs as duties as a cell, and we have organelle function, but it's really the final growth and final preparation before mitosis. And then it's going to ask itself, hey, do I have enough energy to carry out the mitotic phase? So it's going to store up on some energy. All right, after interphase, it jumps into the mitotic phase, and this is a glossy overview. Okay, this is not in depth. That will be a part of a different lecture. So mitotic phase happens after interphase, and we're just going to say it consists of two stages, mitosis and cytokinesis. So mitosis is when the nucleus and everything inside the nucleus divides, and then cytokinesis is the cytoplasm and the organelles divide. So they're shared or split amongst themselves. And the end result of the mitotic phase is two daughter cells, okay? Two daughter cells. Cells that are identical to each other, you can call them clones, but they are the end result from mitosis and cytokinesis. So in this lecture, I just talked in depth about interphase, G1, S, G2. And then I glossed over mitotic phase. This is the mitosis in green. and then the cytokinesis in yellow. So this is where the nucleus and everything inside the nucleus is divided, gets split between the two new cells. And then this is the cytoplasm and the organelles and how they get divided equally between the two new cells. All right, so that does it for section 3.1.